Abomination, a legendary fighter from the Nightmare faction and the first fusible legendary in the game. This video is going to go over everything you need to know about Abomination, where to use him, how to gear him, how he works, about his fusion details, pretty much everything we can cover. So to get things started, we'll talk about his fusion. He is newly added as a fusion hero, and that means if you go to the summon area of the game, you can go to Hero Fusion, and you can see Abomination is available here. The first thing to know is that he can only be fused one time. You cannot fuse him multiple times to get Awakening 5. He can only be fused once, unfortunately. As for the heroes needed to fuse an Abomination, they are Komodo on the left, Vortex, Daemon, and then Harpun. Of these four heroes, the only one I would strongly recommend keeping hold of is Vortex. Usually you want to keep hold of a copy of each epic just in case of these fusion events happen, or in case they get buffed. In this scenario, I would suggest keeping hold of a Vortex and potentially waiting for a second pull before fusing an Abomination, unless you really need a legendary fighter and you already have many capable healers. But Vortex is a very good healer to get, and he's not that uncommon of a pull. But otherwise, the rest of these three are not incredible heroes. They do have their individual niches for sure. Komodo is one of the few bleed heroes in the game, but Abomination is significantly more beneficial for your account. So I would definitely prioritize getting hold of Abomination if you are early to mid game and you don't have him already. He is a very good hero. So next up, we'll take a look at his hero details and his base stats, as these are quite important and actually quite special for Abomination. So you can see he has a block of 2, which is very standard for a fighter. Very rarely do they ever have free block. He has a cost of 17, which is pretty average for a fighter. It's not particularly expensive, it's not particularly cheap, and a revival time of 60, which is the standard. We'll go to max level to see what he's like at 60. And the main standout here, everything is fairly standard, but the main standout is his base HP. 30.5k. That is huge. That puts him at the highest base HP in the entire game over any other fighter and over any other defender even, with the second highest being another fighter, which is Elder. And Elder is a North faction lord, whereas Abomination is a fusible Nightmare hero. He's way more attainable, significantly more attainable, and has the highest base HP in the game. So as far as base stats go for Abomination, he has pretty good attack. His defense is fairly decent, but the main standout is his HP. And again, the attack is not bad by any stretch. 5.8k is pretty high. The best base HP in the game, a pretty good competitive attack base for a legendary fighter. He is a good base hero on stats alone. So that kind of covers his base stats. His attack interval is fairly average. It's quite typical at 2.6 as well for a fighter. So nothing out of the ordinary on that. So now we'll look at his skills. I'll be playing little clips showing you how his individual skills work, though there isn't a lot to show with Abomination, but hopefully it'll give you an idea of how he works. He does not have a talent, unfortunately, so that's the first thing to mention. There is no talent for Abomination, but he has plenty of stuff baked into his skills. Like many fighters, Abomination does normal damage type, which means he gains no benefit for attacking light nor heavy armored enemies, and his basic attack deals 100% damage to one enemy, with a 15% chance of triggering a charged attack that deals 120% damage to all enemies in range. He has a reasonable chance of dealing higher damage in AoE upon making these attacks, so that's not too bad, and it says in range. And that's important because his ultimate affects his range. So Boundless Endurance is his ultimate. It is automatically activated, so you do not manually activate this yourself. It has a base rage cost of 900, so this is how much rage he needs to activate it, and it lasts for 25.5 seconds. The rage cost can be reduced down to 700, which is fairly fast. Not incredibly fast, but it is quite quick. It increases his max HP by 50%, extends his attack range to 2 tiles, and reduces physical damage taken by 20%, but that can increase to 30%. And attacks all enemies in range 2 times. So whenever he attacks, he throws out his mace and pulls it back through the enemies, and each attack will hit twice. This is an upgrade to his basic attack, increasing his damage, HP, and range. It doesn't change his basic attack. That means it can still trigger these bonus splash damage effects. You can see there's good synergy between his skills already. It is 60% AoE damage and it inflicts burning. The AoE damage can be increased to 70% with skill ups, and the burning deals 5% as magic damage per second. But the best thing about Boundless Endurance is the final line. This effect will become permanent after being triggered 2 times, so you don't have to have Abomination out in the field very long for him to have this active permanently. Including the duration of his ultimate and his base regen time, it will take him about 1 minute to trigger his Boundless Endurance for the second time. That will increase or decrease depending on the number of times he attacks enemies or is attacked, as that does passively grant you rage. You can count on it being just about a minute before he activates Boundless Endurance permanently, which is not bad at all. That means naturally he will be better in longer encounters, so short fights and short instances are not really his forte. So Boundless Endurance is a very powerful ultimate for sure, but the rest of his abilities do also synergize quite well with it. His first passive, Blood of Agony. For every 3 times taking damage, permanently increase attack speed by 6 and damage by 3% up to 10 stacks. At max skill, this is for every 2 times taking damage, and it permanently increases attack speed by 10 and damage by 4%. That means after getting hit 20 times in one mission, he will be at full stacks, and that will be granting him 40% damage increase and 100 attack speed increase, assuming you are at max skill. That is quite a good benefit. Again, you want him to be in a run longer to gain these benefits. In a short instance, he won't get all of these. Very good sustaining hero, very good for a long-term battle. You can see his Boundless Endurance being permanent and his Blood of Agony stacking up bonuses. It's a very effective combination. And last off, just to synergize even more, we have Ultimate Torment. When the caster's HP falls down to 40%, one skill up, that is 50%, he gains invulnerability for 4 seconds. That means his health will not decrease when taking damage. He's immune to all damage for 4 seconds upon dropping below either 50 or 40% max HP. And then after those 4 seconds are over, he restores 30% max HP. And that'll be 35% max HP restore if you have 3 skill ups in his passive. The effect can only be triggered once every 55 seconds when it has an innate cooldown of 55 seconds, but again at max skill that goes down to 50 seconds. And when his ultimate is active, this cooldown is reduced by 5 seconds. So again, after a minute, this will be down permanently to 50 seconds or 45 seconds with max skill. So there's a massive amount of uptime on this, and this self-sustain alone is genuinely enough for Abomination to keep himself alive during a load of content. He has a very, very high base HP, remember, and he's self-healing for up to 35% of it whenever he drops below a certain threshold, and he's invulnerable at that threshold, so it's very hard to bring him lower than that. So that is all of Abomination's skills. They synergize incredibly well together. Being able to have this much self-sustain is just really nice, on top of gaining so many damaging effects, and dealing AoE damage, and having 2 tiles, and having invulnerability. It's a really powerful kit for a fighter, and I have used him extensively in my progression runs. You do see him a little less at endgame because his damage output isn't quite as high as some of the other fighters, but he is very versatile in the fact that he is a 2-range fighter when his ultimate is active, and he has some incredible defensive capabilities with his passive giving him invulnerability and self-sustain. So now let's have a look at his awakening. If you've already pulled an Abomination, you can still fuse him to get a free awakening, and I would definitely recommend doing so. His first awakening means that his charge attack triggered by his basic attack will inflict the target with stun. So this is the 15% chance to proc on his basic attack, if you see here, 15% chance of triggering a charge attack, and it will stun for half a second when it does. I have this awakening on my account, and sometimes he will proc this back to back. 15% is not the highest, but it is not that low, and it is fairly common that you'll see him proc this every 2 or 3 swings, or sometimes 2 or 3 swings back to back. It does happen, and when he's just chain stunning in AoE, it is very effective on occasion. Although this isn't the most powerful, it doesn't grant him any damage increase, it doesn't grant him any survivability or sustain or anything like that. It does have quite a nice benefit, but overall I don't think it is that powerful. This is not going to be particularly game changing, it's just kind of nice sometimes. Because you can't rely on it happening, you can't really build around it. So I don't rate it that high as a first awakening, but it isn't bad by any stretch. Second awakening is flat attack of 300. That sounds like it's not that much, but that's because it does actually go onto his base stats. So at max promotion level 60 with 5.8k, this will go up to 6.1k and some change, and that extra 300 will be accounted for in your bonus stats. So if your gear is granting you, let's say, 180% attack, that 180% will be on top of this 300. And then that 300 will be granting you not only 300, but another 540 bonus attack. I definitely wouldn't undervalue these. I think they can be quite beneficial to have. His third awakening enhances his Boundless Endurance ultimate, and it increases the damage dealt by his charge attacks by 20% while it is activated. So this is the first ability again with a 15% chance to activate it. It does 120% AoE damage normally, but with Awakening 3 it's 140% damage while his ultimate is activated, which again becomes permanent after around about a minute. Again, not the strongest awakening, unfortunately. It is not bad by any stretch, but it's one of those things that will passively increase his DPS. But a third awakening only giving you 20% damage bonus sometimes is not really that good compared to some of the other ones we have lately. His 4th Awakening gives him rage regen when he's attacked, so he'll be getting 4 extra rage whenever he's attacked. Unfortunately, Abomination doesn't really need much rage regen. Like I said, after a minute his ultimate is permanently activated. At that point, any rage you're getting is just being binned. You're not getting any benefit from it because his ultimate is permanent at that point. So I don't think this is particularly good for Abomination because he doesn't need it at that point. He will get to his ultimate much faster, so that is a benefit. But you kind of want to use him in longer runs anyway. So I don't really think this is that good personally. There will be some benefit. You will get his ultimate slightly sooner, but it won't be that much sooner. And it's the 4th Awakening to get maybe a few seconds sooner on his ultimate, depending on the context of the battle. I think it's quite underwhelming. As for his Awakening 5, reduces the number of damage instances required to trigger his Blood of Agony passive by 1. So it is normally 3 attacks down to 2 attacks at max level. And with Awakening 5, it's only every 1 attack. So that goes from needing 30 attacks to 20 attacks to 10 attacks to max this passive. Unfortunately, again, I don't think this is that good. You could say it's pretty good for Guild Boss, I guess, because he'll have his max stacks significantly sooner. So this is much, much better for him for Guild Boss. But outside of that, I don't really know where it would matter that much, because either he's getting hit fairly regularly or he's not. And if he is, then this will max in no time anyway. 20 hits doesn't take that long. And if he's not getting attacked that much, then 10 stacks, I guess it's a slight improvement, but he's not really getting his benefit if he's not tanking and fighting, right? My overview of his Awakenings, I think they are kind of rubbish. He is one of the older heroes in the game, and I think they could probably do with reworking his Awakenings. It's not to say that he's a weak hero by any stretch. I think he is still a very good hero just on the base stats and in being in the Nightmare faction alone. But most of these Awakenings are kind of underwhelming. They all passively add to his damage output other than the first one, so that is nice. They are all granting him a quicker access to make him come online sooner. I've never really felt like that's a struggle with him. I've never felt like, I really wish this came up faster. And when I did, it was when I was very early in the game. And when I was that early in the game, there's no way I would have had this many Awakenings at that point, unless you're spending a lot of money, in which case you probably won't be struggling in the early game. So I don't really value his Awakenings that much. I feel like they're quite underwhelming. They're not bad, but they're not particularly strong. They're not worth aiming for. So next up, we're going to talk about his gear and how to use him and where to use him. My general recommendation for gearing Abomination is to focus on DPS like you would any other hero, but just be a bit more conscious about trying to pick up some HP percent substats. That is my suggestion. That is how I build him. If you're early, then you focus attack as much as you can. Try to pick up around 60 attack speed, and then try to build up your crit rate. If you're late, aim for 200% attack, aim for 100 to 150% crit damage, aim for 100% crit rate, and aim for over 120 attack speed. That is the late game build I would suggest. I wouldn't recommend focusing too much on rage regen because again it takes just about a minute for his ultimate to come up, and I would recommend trying to get 100% bonus on his HP. Although it's not in super necessary, he has such a high base HP, again the highest in the entire game, that it would be wasteful not to take advantage of it. So moving on, let's talk about the actual gear sets I would recommend using for him. Many sets will work on almost any hero. As I've said many times, focus on the stats first and focus on the gear after. In my opinion, gearing and focusing on gear sets is more of a late game thing. You really want to get your stats ideal first before going for the sets. But I think one of the best sets for him is the Glacier set. The reason for this is that it scales on his max HP, and that is at the moment of beginning combat. 6% of his max HP will be granted to his attack, and if you take a look at my Abomination, all things are taken into account, mine has 66,000 roughly, which comes out at nearly 4,000 attack bonus were he in the Glacier set. I think the Infernal Roar and the Glacier are the two best sets for Abomination, and then coming up after that is probably Night Terror and the Styx I would recommend. But at this point, it doesn't really matter beyond that. I think the Styx works because he is predominantly AoE damage. Night Terror is just bonus damage on crits, so they're quite reliable sets. Fracture I don't think is a particularly good set for him because Fracture does rely upon him staying above a certain health threshold, and for me at least, Abomination is mainly used in scenarios where he doesn't have a healer on him, so he's not always going to be able to be topped up, and he's going to be relying on his own passive, which will only activate around 40 to 50% HP. So that's what I would suggest for the right hand set. For the weapon and chest armor set, most of these are pretty good. I would typically focus for the Warlord set if you can, because it's a good amount of attack bonus and it is attack speed, which can be quite tricky to get. After that, it's Calamity, Whirlwind, or Annihilating Might is the priorities I would give him. But if you have a Life Force set or a Mortal Warrior set, then they work fine as well. I don't get caught too much up in these. I focus entirely on the stats. Most of them will give you a good benefit in some way. Obviously, if it's a DPS, focus on these DPS sets first. That about covers it for the gearing of Abomination. Build him as a DPS by standard, but do try to pick up some HP in the subs. I do recommend the Glacier set first, but if you can get a really good Infernal Roar set, that might be quite beneficial too. Before we move on to where to use him and how, let's have a look at his artifacts first. If you're using him in Guild Boss a lot with a Salazar or another bleed hero, then you probably want to chuck a Scarlet Hunt on him, as it will grant him some damage bonus to bleeding targets. He's not the best Guild Boss hero, but he can do pretty well, especially at High Awakenings. Otherwise, if you're using him out and about in other campaigns and stuff, then I think the Eye of Sin is quite good, since it scales on AoE damage, and he is predominantly AoE damage. Flawless Blade is not particularly good for him because he will take damage a lot. He's built around needing damage, so Flawless Blade is an awful artifact for Abomination. Ragnarok is also not particularly good for Abomination because he has a passive that locks his health for either 40 or 50% and then heals him. So he will actually be keeping himself above Ragnarok's threshold the majority of the time. And if he's not, then he may be dying. So Ragnarok does not work especially well for Abomination. There are a bunch of legendary artifacts that are fairly decent. The Watchguard's Ambition has a chance to proc additional basic attacks, which for Abomination is not bad since he has a 15% chance to do his charge attack, and the more attacks he makes, the more chance of making charge attacks. So I think the Watchguard's Ambition is not particularly bad, but in general I would suggest either the Scarlet Hunt if you're using him with Salazar, or the Eye of Sin otherwise, because I think the AoE damage bonus is probably going to be better overall. That kind of covers it for a quick talk about the artifacts worth using. Most legendaries I would suggest not building, and I would definitely not build any of the epic artifacts. So finally, to talk about where to actually use Abomination, I think he's an absolute monster in campaign progression just because you can use him as a defender, you can place him behind a defender or another fighter, so you get a 2-tile attacker. You can use him to block waves, to block massive damage instances with his invulnerability passive. He also has pretty good damage output, and he does AoE damage, so he can be good against larger waves. Looking towards the raids, he is pretty good in the promotion raid, using him in the melee attack because you can face him up. He'll cover his lane as well as 2 lanes in front of him. In the resource raids, he's pretty good because he is area damage. In Guild Boss, he's part of the Nightmare faction, which is one of the easiest factions to build early game, as you do get Wrath. So him plus Wrath is a very good combo that I would definitely suggest using, as Wrath is granted as a login bonus, and Abomination is now fusible, so it is a early game dream team. In the gear raids, he can be used very mildly in Gear Raid 1 because he does have some AoE damage, but it's not great really. You do want mages predominantly here, but if you're progressing, then definitely give him a try. He may be able to help you out. In Gear Raid 2, he can be phenomenal so long as he can survive the instance of the boulder attack. The rolling boulders do massive damage, and his HP lock is a really good way of surviving those. You just need to make sure his health is high enough that he doesn't get outright one-shot, because his passive does not give him death protection. It just means if his health goes to that threshold, it gets stopped. But if he gets one shot, he's still dead. In Gear Raid 3, he is completely useless as he has no anti-air capabilities. He's fantastic in the Artifact Material Raid. You can use him even to block Salazar if yours is strong enough and you can kill the boss fast enough. You can use him to block lanes, and he does have AoE cleave, so he can even assist behind a defender if he's not tanky enough. Generally, I think Abomination is one of the better heroes to use for Artifact Material Raid. He's really built for this kind of stuff. In Arena, he is obviously going to be useless in the anti-air days. He is going to be okay in the AoE DPS days. I have seen some teams built around Nightmare heroes. Wrath does have splash damage sometimes. Abomination has AoE damage. There are a few Nightmare heroes that actually can make it work. There's like these strange Nightmare teams that you see popping up sometimes. He can be quite good in the single target DPS days, but not at the end game. He'll just be kind of decent around the mid, early to mid. So that brings us to single target and sustained DPS. He can be used in both of these to some decent amount of success. He has decent damage, he has AoE damage, and both of these will have multiple enemies, single target having less, but still around 2 to 3 enemies per wave usually. So his AoE damage is not bad. He is also very tanky, so you can use him as a tank in this if you're scared that your Salazar, if you have Salazar, isn't tanky enough. Abomination is a great hero to use to block and hold the wave in both of these even. But I would say he probably performs a bit better in sustained DPS. He's not really the top in either of these two. He's just pretty good to use because you do have a lot of Wraths popping up. There are a lot of Wrath teams. And you see Abomination is ranked 9 at the moment in Overlord. So he is performing quite well even at the top arena. In single target, he is all the way down at number 20, but he is still showing, which is not too bad. In Arena, sustained DPS is the better area for Abomination because they are harder hitting enemies and there are more enemies. That's the scenario where Abomination shines, is when there are lots of enemies and it's quite a bit of damage. That's kind of his bread and butter. Anyway, that pretty much covers the video on Abomination. I hope you found this helpful and useful. If you have any questions, do leave it below and I will do my best to get back to you. Thank you guys very much for watching. Have a great day. Take care and bye-bye.